increasingly controversial as we walk through the plan. So ferry marshalling was part of our undertaking. And as a longtime resident, and with people that come visit me quite a bit, I'm sure you all have guests that arrive, it occurred to me that this is actually what they see. I mean, is this really what the island is about, right? It's a sea of asphalt. There must be something better that we can do. And there's a lot of practicality to it, don't get me wrong, but there must be something better that can be done. So we looked at all the other plans. As everybody knows, there's many plans. And the acoustics plan at the time had a fair amount of favor for looking at ferry marshalling. And what it did, for those of you that don't know, here's the library. It proposed that ferry marshalling essentially move into the park, not too far, but a ways, allowing for a double-sided village, which we thought was a pretty cool idea. Unfortunately, at the time, and I'm sure even now, that there's so much controversy about going into the park that this scheme, even though it held a lot of favor at the time, it died at the time as well. So what we looked at, in addition to all the pedestrian open spaces, we looked at, for instance, making the pedestrian the primary focus of what we did, not the car. And we looked at having the ability for any transportation or traffic movement in the cove being versatile. And what that meant is that we could open and close lanes depending on traffic. We could park in lanes or not park in lanes depending on traffic. This would have to be done on an annual basis, basically looking at traffic flow. And interestingly, as you all know, ferry car traffic has decreased since the time we did this plan. At the time, we thought it might actually increase, so it's gone the opposite way. And it also included, at the time, a very controversial road, which is this little road here, which snakes behind everything and ends up at the back of the gas station. So I'll zoom in on that in a moment to show you that it actually goes into the park less than the acoustics plan. But what it did allow for is the same thing that the acoustics plan did, is that offloading traffic would be taken away from the core of the cove. And this was, I won't go into detail about this, we did a number of studies of where to marshal cars. In general, we ended up marshalling most of them. There's a number of options, but most of them in the upper cove above Dorman. There was also an option of using Ronnie's parking lot for marshalling as well, where you could actually marshal the entire ferry load in one go. I didn't actually like that one personally, but it was included. So this was the recommended option, which included most of the ferry marshalling up here, and that very small road through the back way, which we actually mapped out through the trees and figured out where it would go so that essentially it wouldn't look any different than it would today. We did a parking plan which looked at a variety of areas, including sites like where the buses are and where the new community center is for parking areas, so that people would walk on the ferry or walk to the cove. And even things like this, when we were looking at creative ways to find where to put cars, this is Dorman Road, this is the sewage treatment area. There's actually an old logging cut through here. If you walk through there, that's being bulldozed. There's a roadbed already there. And what we were looking at is actually just between the trees, allowing for parking in there, which on event days and things would be quite convenient as well. So we did a number of sections and studies of the building types. This is a section looking west from the on Government Road, looking at the buildings stepping back, 3 stories as they are today on the south side of Government Road, and 4 stories on the north. Here's that road at the back that nudges into the park. It didn't take down any mature trees, by the way. It also allows for, if we don't need this much traffic at any time, this is a very useful service road for the backs of these buildings. So that servicing of the buildings can happen from the rear. We looked at other small towns like Nelson that do a lot of great things. We looked at making the roads that we build pervious so that they're actually part of the greenscape. They're not a sea of asphalt. We looked at bikes, scooters, sorts of things. The pedestrian first environment, these are the final plans that we created, basically showing a lot of green because we wanted to indicate that what we were doing was simply using existing building sites and going vertical and trying to save a lot of the green space. That's the kind of landscape we're looking at. This was a rendering we did of Government Road looking down towards the ferry. That would be the gas station site on the left and a couple of other developments. Again, just building on the original idea of those fingers where the densification would go. Potential growth areas through time. And we ended up having what we call 5 precincts to the cove. So there was the Civic Precinct, the Upper Cove Precinct that included Artisan Square, the Hilltop Residential Precinct, the Village Center Precinct, and then basically the Parkland area to the north.
Alan, I don't see any integration with the with that area, the white area below the red area.
This?
No, further down.
Hilltop.
Right there.
Yeah.
Right.
And going to the water.
Well, that's,
There's no integration. Like,
So what, I can speak to that if you like.
Yeah.
Our team felt that we would actually like to develop the area where the cottages were, but the community was very highly resistant to that. So in the end, the plan we did preserve the cottages as they were and left that land alone.
so Crippen Field stays as park,
Yeah.
and the cottages being redeveloped for tourist commercial guest cottages.
I mean, my personal opinion at the time, if you look at the true history of the island, those cottages were everywhere, including up in here. That it would be smarter to move them into a more concentrated area. This is the prime development site. There's no question about it. But at the time, it was too controversial. And there were too many controversial things in the plan to go through that discussion as well.
but it was recognized that that area
Absolutely.
is the potential
Absolutely.
for growth.
Yeah. Yeah, it just wouldn't fly. We would have had people not showing up to the meetings, I think.
That area was recognized as a growth potential both in the Snug Cove Master Plan in the beginning and when the Light Bodies Committee that did the Snug Cove planning in 2000 had a huge resistance to having anything other than the sort of cottage redevelopment for the guest cottage type.
Even though it probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
What's
Doesn't
there
make
now?
sense
What's there now?
to develop the cottages or redevelop the cottages.
No, it makes economically, I don't think it makes any sense. I'm not even sure from I mean, how many people that live here wander through the cottages, right? It's not something I do. I mean, it's just not part of the fabric of the place. So I think it does need attention. We did some other sections. This is looking north through Miller Road and the buildings that would address that. We did a final version of the, including all the programming for the civic facilities, a public space in between the two buildings, the civic porch that I talked about, the connections to the pedestrian areas, that sort of thing.
Sorry, Alan, can you go back? That little orange and gray one down at the bottom was one of the alternative sites where the municipal hall could go with the
That's right.
mixed-use residential up above.
Yeah, in this scheme it was mixed use. At the Four Corners site, here's the new city hall and library that we were looking at. The city hall would be on the left, and that was the library potentially. Sustainability. We looked at the final build out in 25 years of structures. And ferry marshalling. So I just wanted to quickly show this slide. Sorry, it's a bit blurry. This is the Lower Cove. That's the existing library, the new square we proposed. This final development also included development of Rondi's parking lot so that it actually had buildings facing the street. Something Rondi, by the way, has sketched by himself many times. He has thought about this. And buildings facing the marina as well. So there is a development of that site. But the important thing here is that this red dark line is the acoustics plan overlaid on our plan. So that's how far it went into the park. what we did is we shrunk Government Road down, we narrowed it, which allowed for these buildings to be developed on the other side. And that little, I'll call it a little road that goes around the back, actually fit within the acoustics plan, except for this one moment here. That was it. And at the time, the municipal government at the time paid for a study after we had completed this from a transportation engineer that never consulted us, and they showed this road as a typical Ministry of Highways road that was bermed up with ditches and bulldozed right through the park, and everybody said, wow, it's this massive road. We never contemplated it as that. We contemplated it as a green paved road that was fit in between the trees and allowed the traffic. Now, there is some damage to the park. I'm not saying there was none, but it was nothing like the study that was undertaken that sort of, I guess in the end, killed this idea.
It was all to do with cutting a little bit of blasting and removal of a rock knoll and a few trees that were there.
That's right. Right at this point behind the gas station, there would be a little bit of blasting. So this shows the pathway of traffic from the ferry through the backside. And it's important because what it does is, you may notice a lot of the trucks that come off the ferry initially wait or have to find a way to turn around and service the businesses in the Lower Cove. What this allowed was for them to go up with a new roundabout in front of the school with the proper turning radius for larger vehicles to go up to that point and come back down to the cove. So it was all types of traffic were thought of at the time.
So, would you continue to have the traffic going onto the ferry coming down Government Road?
Yes, but we stacked most of it up here at the top, so that at the bottom it was single lane. The other thing we did, which I haven't obviously highlighted everything that we did, but at the bottom we allowed for special stacking of cars. They were primary spots, so there was one through lane and one stacking lane. And the through lane allowed for electric vehicles or smart cars or motorcycles, things that we wanted to give primacy to on the ferry to get primary loading at the bottom.
Did ferries, I know we had a meeting with ferries in your office, but I can't remember what their comments were on this plan.
At the time, they were very supportive.
Yeah, because I've always heard that they didn't seem to like this double stacking up above government, up above Miller's, that they like to be able to see it, which means it has to be down lower.
That's true. They did point that out, and this plan allows for that to happen as well. But our feeling from the island point of view was that we'd rather stack the cars at the top.
Alan, I just have a question about. I see a village as like you probably saw a village more pedestrian oriented, and with trucks and cars running up and down once an hour.
Yes.
It seems to me that that's not pedestrian oriented anymore.
Yeah. That's what we try to do. So if you think of the Lower Cove in this design, the vehicles that were offloading the ferry were taken behind the village,
Right.
so they didn't interfere. The traffic that went down into the cove, there was one lane of stacking. One lane of stacking and one through lane only. You need a through lane for emergency vehicles and for people going to the marina or the library or that sort of thing. And by the way, most of the streets we do want cars on them. We want parked cars because that's the activity for the commercials. It's also a buffer from the pedestrians to the streetscape to have parked cars. It's actually an advantage. And we do want traffic, we want activity, but we want it slowed. Thank you. We want the pedestrian activity to be safe and be paramount. And that was the intent of the design. Whether we achieved it or not, we may never know.
Alan, you had a sort of a general implementation plan. Is that on this slide
I
anywhere?
think it's the last slide, but it would be hard to read, I imagine. I think I'm almost done for those of you that are twitching in your seats. So again, just looking at some of the places for social interaction, pink dots. One of the other things we did propose as a future piece was a civic amphitheater just behind the ballpark. in that open grass field. And
That's part of Crippen Park.
yeah,
It's not municipal land, right?
I can't remember now.
It's perfect.
Yeah, one of the other, just so everybody knows, we had a negotiation with the then GVRD sort of behind the scenes at the time. And at the time, I wasn't allowed to talk about this a lot, but I'm sure this many years later we are. They would have gladly given us some of the land in various parts of Crippen Park in exchange for other pieces of land further in the island that they felt were more truly park-like. They would have given the municipality the land. And we also, by the way, here's the Chevron site, which has some toxicity to it, by the way. I don't know how many of you know that. This was an old storage area for gas. And we met with Chevron as well, and they were willing to, under the right circumstances, they would remediate that site for us at no cost to the municipality. And part of what we looked at was actually clipping off the corner of that to allow those cars to go through the corner. So we tried to talk to everybody we could at the time. So here's your answer to the municipal hall. Here's the Ready Potato and the old pub and the old gas station. That's where we put the municipal hall, and you can see the smaller red areas were meant to be cafes or some street-facing commercial. This site also allowed for the potential of a mixed-use commercial at grade residential building behind it, which may or may not have been part of the economics of the municipal hall. And the future library would have been across the street. So we made a civic square here that, you know, in this scheme envisioned the paving to be brought right through, so that again, that was a pedestrian focused area. And the reason it could be a pedestrian focused area is because the traffic was spent around it, not within it. So there'd be very little traffic that actually had to go through there. Just other opportunity sites around the village. Surplus lands and looking at development within those. And we actually began to go as far, this is the elementary school and the proposed site for the community center. We actually parceled all the land in the surplus lands into potential parcels as well. And we obviously didn't take it to the Land Titles Act, or to land titles, but we did that as well. Park space, including park space behind the school. This is the Abbey Field area here. So that this became part of the pedestrian pathway. There's already or was a pathway through there. It's being messed with a little bit.
Alan, on back of that numbered lot, was there any mixed-use resident or any residential behind the school?
No, this was all preserved as green space, 5 acres of green space. We looked at heron nesting sites, which we all know of. There's also some out here on occasion. And in the form of development here, in consultation with everybody that was involved at the time, we actually stepped these buildings on the other side of Government Road. So this is a 1-story building here, a 2-story, a 3-story, 4-story. So we respected that area by just bringing the buildings up very slowly in scale. That was the agricultural sites that I mentioned. Some funny pictures. This is Salt Spring Island, which, for instance, has a fair amount of agriculture. That was that main pedestrian spine through the heart of the cove. And just zooming in on that, this is the civic precinct, the community center area. You can see how closely linked those were by that pedestrian path, right to the ballpark and the potential civic square. That was just a zoom in on Ronnie's parking lot site and how to develop that. We actually felt this was pretty important because this is part of what you see as you arrive at the island. We think this is an important place to have a presentation of activity in buildings. And this is actually, believe it or not, a rendering of what the cove would look like 25 years from now in this plan. So here's the buildings on Ronnie's site. If you look closely, you can see the buildings on the other side of the road. So the reason we did this was just to illustrate to people this was not a radical thing. It was simply fitting things into the existing context. And that's the stepping buildings. So this is, ironically, 2012. We predicted what things would look like. And then 2030. And this was a major master plan which needs a bigger piece. We looked at phasing of development and where the likely sites were, including the surplus land sites. That's all in the report. We looked at unit counts that were based on different than the zoning we have on Bowen now. That basically we looked at density per site. And areas that would be zoned for commercial use. Unit counts we did just as a part of the report. I won't bore you with those that are in there, but they're not radical. We're looking at 70 to 120 units at full build out of the lower cove. And this is the document we're looking for. You won't be able to read it. But Allison can hold it up. It's in the back of the book that she has. It was a roadmap of how the municipal government can do this. Setting priority goals, how to implement them, early action items, and ultimate action items. That was a statistical summary of the entire report. And this was a rendering we did of what the cove would look like as well. So the interesting thing is the government road would be narrower than it is today. It would have this forecourt, which is what we call Cenotaph Square, which would be paved differently, so it would allow for different activity to happen. The front lawn of the library would increase quite a bit and become more of a landscape for people to sit on and participate in the cove. That's it.